You're watching Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. A live look at the Strait of Hormuz, courtesy of Marine Traffic. The U.S. military saying that they carried out the sixth consecutive night of strikes in Iran. The United States intensifying its strikes against Iran in the past 24 hours, saying that they hit targets farther north and firing into a ship that the U.S. accused of trying to break its naval blockade on Iran. Iran then retaliated by launching missiles and drones at U.S. allies in the region and warned that it may escalate its attacks. Let's check in with Professor Alon Burstein of the Israel-Palestine Report. He's here with me. Alon, always love bringing you on when we hear of strikes happening in parts of the world that I'm not quite familiar with, that many of us are not quite familiar with. It says northern Iran. They struck more north. I'm assuming we don't have too many details about that for now. But in general, what part of the country is that? What might they be firing at?
Thank you for having me, Austin. I'm literally looking down on my phone because there's reports coming in right now about potential attacks, but nothing confirmed at the moment. I will say that according to reports that have come out in Iran, the majority of attacks that have been going on in this fifth or sixth wave, depending on how we count, have still been centered relatively in the southern parts of Iran. What is interesting is that the United States tried over the last 24 hours to escalate its attacks, very, very blatantly sending a message to Iran, blatantly saying this is going to keep on building up. It's a little unclear what the United States is demanding. On the one hand, it's demanding that Iran return to the negotiation table. On the other hand, the Trump administration has said that Iran is begging for a deal. So if they are begging for a deal, are we going to negotiate? How is that happening? But what is clear is the range of attacks that the United States have carried out over the last 24 hours have been escalatory in everything, in their target packages, in the levels of bombings, and in the range. So just to illustrate, most of the attacks that we have been carrying out from the United States over the last 4 or 5 days have concentrated in the area of the Strait of Hormuz for obvious reasons. That's what the United States has been trying to signal, that it is going to enforce its blockade and Iran does not control it. So we've had most attacks in Bandar Abbas and in Qeshm Island and in a bunch of areas, Sirik, around this area. What has happened in the last 24 hours is, first of all, the target packages in these areas have changed. All of a sudden, we have seen attacks in Bandar Abbas that are including bridges, which we know is very important to Trump. He said specifically that attacks against bridges and power plants was going to be the next level. So we had attacks against bridges in Bandar Abbas, some very important bridges connecting to the Shiraz area. Then we had some very, very powerful attacks that happened in Kish Island over here, still in the area of the Gulf. But what's important about that is that we attacked an airport. The United States attacked an airport and specifically power plants. And there's reports that in Kish Island, there is a power outage. And in terms of the attacks that were reported that happened further north, I think the operative word there is further, because I haven't seen any reports, not from the United States, but also not from forces on the ground in Iran, talking about attacks in northern Iran. But what we have seen is attacks further north in this area. And here also, in the area of Ahvaz, over here, we had an attack against a train station, a train compound that the United States has said is not a civilian target. It is used by the IRGC. And we also had attacks that occurred, I'm not actually finding it on the map, I think it's over here, attacks that occurred against the area that is known as Bustan. It is a city that also the United States has attacked a power plant in that region. There were reports that air defense units have been operated in Tehran, the capital up here. There's been absolutely no reports of anything being bombed and no reports of the United States that it hit anything in Tehran. So I don't know if we actually bombed in Tehran this past 24 hours or not. But when I've seen further north, what I'm seeing is pushing further north into here and attacking different targets around here and Bushehr over here, and mostly seeing the United States sending a message. We're going to start attacking trains, airports, bridges, power plants, and we're moving slowly away from the Gulf, further in, and I think this is all meant as a pressure building mechanism. The United States is still hoping that we'll come to a deal. One last thing I'll say, it's important to remember that before we got to the ceasefire in April, what we were leading up to was Trump's repeated threats the United States was going to wipe out all the power plants and all the bridges. And he declared power plant day and bridge day was going to happen. And all of a sudden, a day before that, we had the ceasefire. I think Trump is probably gambling that similarly, escalating in that direction may bring Iran back to coming to some sort of deal, maybe something more what the administration would like to see.
You know, I think another question people have, the U.S. military says they're continuing to carry out strikes in an effort to, quote, further degrade Iranian military capabilities. They've been saying this night in and night out. What do we know about what is actually left of Iran's military capabilities?
So the message, I would argue, is being made deliberately vague. Because ultimately, if we look, first of all, what the Trump administration cares about when it comes to domestic politics, right? Most people in the United States don't really care if you attack this ship or this city. So at the end of the day, that's a blanket statement. And by the way, the United States is not alone in that. Israel very similarly says it attacks, you and I have said it countless times, terror infrastructure of Hezbollah and Hamas. What is that? It's a way to say we attack military targets and don't ask any more questions. So that's just the first thing that's important to note. The United States has such a big range of military targets that still exist in Iran. This could be anything from bases, missile launching pads, areas that they used to launch drones in the area of the Straits of Hormuz, ports that are used for the smaller IRGC boats. The main Iranian fleet may have been destroyed, but the IRGC maintains a massive fleet of small boats, and all it takes is two people with a shoulder-mounted rocket launcher, and they can disable an oil tanker, and again, we're back to the Strait of Hormuz being closed. So there's so many targets that could fall under the category of carrying out strikes to degrade Iran's military capabilities that really it is impossible to know. When they say that, all I take from that is that the United States is carrying out strikes that are aimed to weaken Iran's ability to threaten the Straits. It could be anything from rocket producing sites, drone launching areas, a port, a power plant. Any of these things are part of what Iran uses as an overwhelming chain in order to carry out still military activities in the Strait of Hormuz.
You know, Trump is having a primetime address tonight. He'll be talking at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Pacific Time. He also gave a primetime address in April, and that really was focused on the Middle East. Tonight, not expected to be focused on the Middle East. He'll be talking about politics and election systems in the U.S., reportedly. But April was focusing all on the Middle East. Back then, during that primetime address, he said that the U.S. would accomplish its Iran war objectives, quote, very shortly. How do we assess that now alone, that we're in July? They said very shortly back in April. As we look to yet another primetime speech, and again, I'll just underline this one is not going to be focused on the Middle East. What's our assessment of how much progress the U.S. has made since the last White House address?
So it's important to distinguish, I would say, between several things. First of all, achieving goals in war, unless your goal is the complete takeover of another country, then the goals are always measured based on your political position, right? If Russia and Ukraine were to freeze at this moment, Putin could come back and say, I wanted to make sure that we get Crimea and the area of Donbass and eastern Ukraine, and we got it. And it took this long, and we got it. Or it could be described as a complete failure because Putin wanted to oust the leadership of Ukraine, etc. Similarly, when war aims are described in vague terms like neutralizing or obliterating or weakening, it's very difficult to assess levels of success. And especially this goes for in the Middle East, right? When it came to the aims of the war in Iran, the United States said, stopping Iran from getting nuclear weapons, that Trump can say at any point is achieved because Iran has declared that they do not want nuclear weapons, or we can say that failed because Iran still has the enriched uranium. It's going to depend on political positions, how people analyze that. Similarly, initially, the United States said that it wants to take out Iran's ballistic missile program. Now, Trump has said, well, other countries, he said Saudi Arabia, but very likely meant Israel when it came to the balance of power in the Middle East, have ballistic missiles. We can't limit Iran from having ballistic missiles. Is that a success? Is that a failure? It's going to end up being a political interpretation of how things are. What is important is two things, I would say. One, when it comes to evaluating the ultimate outcome of the war, it's very difficult to assess the initial statements. Right? The initial statements, when you fire a first shot in the war, you have no idea where things are going to go. What you have to assess at the end is where do things stand compared to where they started. Whether you said you're going to have total victory or complete destruction of Iran's nuclear facilities or not, where do things stand? Is Iran weaker? Is Iran stronger? Is the Middle East a safer place or not? And that is so in flux at this point. When we had the memorandum of understanding, we could start assessing it. Now that seems to have been thrown out the window. So it's incredibly difficult to assess, is Iran in a weaker position or a stronger position? The second thing that we need to assess is, how do things look moving forward with regards to the balance of threats in the region? And in that also, we've had an interesting development in the last 24 hours with Iran all of a sudden, again, activating the Houthis, the group that controls parts of Yemen, threatening to cut off the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, to cut off another major major waterway in the world if Iran's power plants are attacked. So once again, Trump could come back and say, but they never did that, and therefore we came out on top. Iran can say we threatened them and then we got to a deal. It's very, very difficult to assess. And it's going to come down, unfortunately, we're in an era where what the actual objective reality of is one side stronger or not going to be what most people assess. Most people are going to assess it based on their political perspectives. Most people who support Trump and the administration are going to say, look, we achieved a lot because Iran's leadership has been assassinated by and large, and it is possibly in a weaker position. The United States has brought them to a deal. Others will point to the initial war objectives, looking at the nuclear material and the ballistic missile program and saying, you haven't achieved any of that. So it's really up for grabs at this point.
I want to make sure I get Rosa's question in here. And Rosa is in Pennsylvania. Rosa, we appreciate the detailed question here. This is a big one, Alon, but I think it's worth asking. I think this question is on a lot of people's minds, and it's indicative of pretty much the big picture, I think. Rosa asks, what is the clearly defined end goal of U.S. military action in Iran? What conditions would end the strikes? And how will the administration prevent this from becoming an open-ended regional war that costs more American lives and raises fuel prices? Or in short, what does victory in Iran actually look like? And Alon, what is America's exit strategy?
Very, very big question. And unfortunately, there is no short answer. Because again, it relates to how far ahead in the future are we looking? If we're looking into the future in terms of, is Iran going to stop chanting death to America, stop supporting proxies that carry out attacks against American and American allied targets, then victory is going to look like if Iran stops doing that, and that is not likely to happen. So if we're measuring victory by that, it will have been a failure so far, and it won't be a success if and when that does happen. In turn, what the United States would probably, and at this point, with this administration, the United States would probably categorize as a success would be a de-escalation, which we had with the Memorandum of Understanding, a de-escalation and some sort of channel and mechanism for the United States and Iran to be working together in order to resolve what I'll say is regional problems. You know, when the war started in February, we had the IRGC defined as a terror group by the United States, massive airstrikes and assassinations carried out by Israel, attacks carried out by the United States. When we got to ceasefire between April and June, we have the United States and the IRGC sending representatives together to sit down in Qatar to negotiate and talk and figure out how to resolve their differences. We had the United States and Iran coming to some sort of terms about how the Strait of Hormuz is going to be controlled. Iran feels like it came out on top because it is in a much more stronger regional position when it comes to the Gulf countries on the one hand. And then the United States may feel like it showed that if it wants, it can carry out very, very massive strikes and no one can stop it, militarily at least. Iran has managed to cripple the United States maybe economically, but militarily no one can stop it. So it's very difficult to assess. But the last thing that I'll say is with regards to what is the United States' exit strategy, I think it is constantly evolving. I think the initial exit strategy was, Trump had said he thought this war was going to take 3 days. That would have ended March 2nd, March 3rd. I think the initial plan was to have a quick strike and have it be over. Then it was to come to some sort of accommodation. Now we look like we're in somewhat of a war of attrition. The United States would like to see this ending prior to the midterms, obviously. But at this point, it's about if the United States or Iran are going to agree to the other side's terms and just say, you know what, we've had it, let's call it quits and leave from here. Or if they'll still keep working towards an accommodation where both sides compromise, that will obviously take much longer.
You can keep in touch with Alon over at the Israel-Palestine Report. How can people keep up with your content and your courses?
So like you said, Israel-Palestine Report on YouTube. You can also check out my website, alonburstein.com. There I have lots of information. We have free webinars, free courses, lots of things going on in the Middle East, and we're always happy to share our knowledge as much as possible.
We appreciate you, Alon. Have a good night.